Karel Teifer, my friend, welcome to the Super
Alec,
Connector podcast.
Alec Hamilton, my friend, I'm honored to be here.
Great to have you. So I see that you're currently in the act of rolling up a marijuana cigarette.
That is precisely correct. A reefer, if you would.
Reefer. And I hear that you are living in a state where that is newly legalized.
Just recently, within the last couple months, permitted to do this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. So how does it feel?
Well, I did it all the time when it was illegal, but it definitely I have noticed a little bit of a shift. I'm not routinely, breaking the law on a daily basis, and that makes me feel just a little bit different about the world and my place in it. That's a positive thing. I don't feel as at odds with the society around me.
Mm-hmm.
Over something.
Yeah, it takes a psychological toll.
Yeah, it's a little weight off the mind. I even though it's been illegal here, I've never actually been in any real danger. The law it hasn't been very evenly enforced in my city for many years, and though I've fragrantly smoked marijuana on the streets of New York City for many years, I've never come close to being arrested. But of course, that's not true for people in other neighborhoods where things are enforced much more harshly. But now for them, that's a much bigger deal.
Yeah, sure. So what was the organization of, like, are we talking about separated on racial background, socioeconomic separations? What are we talking about?
Yeah. Black and Latino people were just policed way more for drugs than white people.
Mm-hmm.
That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's so we're diving right in here to one of the hot button issues, which I think it's absolutely one of the most important topics of conversation in our modern American discourse. And I think personally that in terms of systemic racism and actually removing that where it does exist, dismantling the war on drugs is one of the biggest real steps that can be taken.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. The war on drugs was explicitly started in order to harm political dissidents and keep racial minorities subjugated. Like, that's explicitly, we have it on record from Nixon and his cronies when they were discussing the drug war. They recorded what they were saying. They're famous for that. That they were making these laws specifically because they wanted to associate the anti-war movement with criminality and the civil rights movement with criminality. So.
Wow, yeah, it's crazy that can be public knowledge for so long and still the laws remained.
They did a very good propaganda job on several generations. But I think they really failed with our generation as far as the anti-drug propaganda is concerned. Now, I don't know what it is, if it's popular culture or the internet or the fact that we grew up with parents who were from the hippie generation. Maybe that has something to do with it too, that like we know that our parents, our role models, whatever, probably experimented with stuff when they were young, if they were hippies or whatever. And they're fine. So there were certain, I don't know. Our generation isn't as into the drug war as previous ones were.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a clear and obvious failure, for one thing.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, it was much easier for me to get pot or even cocaine than it was to buy a beer until my beard filled in. Like if you want to think of the children, regulating something is always better than if you're trying to protect a certain population than to just sort of let it go wild. But yeah, we knew it was a failure.
Yeah, the many issues that come with it being illegal are not simply about the mistreatment of the so-called perpetrators, but also all of the ecosystem, the black market ecosystem that's created around it.
Right. And far more nefarious activities that can be funded with drug money.
Right.
Yeah.
Indeed.
It's real stuff.
And so, just sort of on a base level, the idea of making a plant illegal, making nature illegal is patently absurd.
It is patently absurd. I think any prohibition law, really. I mean, even if we're talking about something manufactured in a laboratory, I mean, before the Controlled Substances Act came out and things were put onto like Schedule 1, there was no concept that there was a substance that even like a doctor couldn't get their hands on to give to somebody. Like that, it should be some policymaker with no scientific knowledge who gets to decide like what chemical a patient can have access to, instead of the professional who's like treating them and has studied the human body and knows what they're doing. The idea that there would be a chemical that even a doctor can't get didn't exist before that. I mean, sure, there are poisons and whatever, but we don't need to put cyanide on Schedule 1 because nobody's going to give that to anybody. They only put things on Schedule 1 because they're afraid somebody will give it to someone because there might be a use for it, and they don't like that.
Yeah, the Schedule 1 designation is very interesting because it refers to something that has no known
medical
what's
application.
The word they use?
No
medical application, yeah.
And a high risk of abuse. Those are the two things that, because I guess, strawberries probably don't have a known medical application. I mean, maybe they do in homeopathy or whatever, but they have no risk of abuse. Nobody's out there like abusing strawberries. But what is abuse? Like, it's very hard to abuse a drug like DMT that's gonna like yell at you if you use it too often.
Yeah, well, one thing I've noticed about a lot of the drugs that I've experimented with is that even the drugs will tell you not to do drugs.
Yeah. You get to a point, especially with the psychedelics, and they will tell you when you've had too much. They will not encourage you to keep going.
And those are the ones that I've predominantly experimented with. So, for instance, LSD and mushrooms are still being Schedule 1 in a lot of, are mushrooms Schedule 2 or 1? I forget.
They're Schedule 1. So the new rules in Oregon that say that it can be prescribed. But that's the funny thing. Marijuana is also Schedule 1. According to the federal government, there is no known medical application, even though the majority of states have said we have medical applications. So I mean, it's no, yeah. So regardless of the fact that we know mushrooms and LSD have legitimate medical applications, and MDMA, these are all Schedule 1 substances. It's interesting because like methamphetamine is a Schedule 2 substance. We admit that even that methamphetamine, like sometimes you have to give somebody meth, sure. But
well, we liberally prescribe it to our children, in fact, these days.
something like it, yeah.
Yeah, not literal exact methamphetamine, but it is a methamphetamine derivative.
Yeah.
Being, of course, of Adderall and Ritalin.
The only on-label application for methamphetamine, I think, is if you're so obese that you're gonna die, they'll give you meth, or they can prescribe you meth because that'll make you lose some weight.
That'll sort you out.
Not sort you out necessarily, but maybe pretty extreme.
Just in regards to the weight, yeah, that's something.
But I do think amphetamines have a legitimate application if we're going to talk about giving that to children. That's an interesting conversation. I was actually prescribed amphetamines as a child, and I deeply resent that, and I think it wasn't very good for my development. But as an adult, I do use them on occasion. I have an amphetamine prescription from my doctor. I certainly don't use it frequently, but of course I took some before I did my taxes because I can't, And I think that's legitimate. We should have the right to decide that's how we want to use this tool. It's not. I'm not having fun and games with it, but certainly to give it to a kid is ridiculous because a kid is still learning how their brain works. I mean, most adults everybody's still learning how their brain works. It's a constant part of life. But for a kid, I agree with you. It's not right.
Yeah, and it's certainly done under false pretenses, very much having to do with the way that we keep children in environments that aren't necessarily conducive to their growth, or health or anything. Of course, they're distractible and hyperactive because they're being forced to sit in a chair for 8 hours a day, which is
right.
Even as an adult, that's pretty horrible.
Right. And then there are certain kids who have an especially hard time with it, and they're considered somehow sort of deviant from the system, which, as you said, is already hard for all kids because it's sort of against a kid's natural impulses in general. But kids who end up with diagnoses, not everybody's brain is the same, but that these differences, I think they sort of have an evolutionary place in the group. Like if we're going to say that we can diagnose reliably about 10% of people with ADHD, no matter where we go, if we have a checklist of these symptoms, no matter where we go, we find 10% of it. Well, maybe 10% of the people are supposed to be like that. When we have a society, we need some people who can be awake during the day, some people who can be awake at night, some people who pay attention to detail, some people who pay attention to the big picture, right? We're pack animals. So we share the cognitive process, right? You are specialized in one kind of thinking and I'm specialized in another kind of thinking. And that way we can make group decisions better. So that's my thought on these differences that, you have a population that is like this. It's only a disorder that you have to medicate or correct or something when you have a society like the one we have where you try to smooth over that difference instead of finding the unique place for all of these different mind types in a harmonious society.
Yeah, that's very well said. I think there's a lot of characteristics of people diagnosed ADD or ADHD that are extremely useful for certain things. And also, I want to say I wasn't trying to bash amphetamines here.
Oh no, I didn't think you were.
I
wanted to advertise.
I was diagnosed and had and was prescribed to one for a while as well. And I found it to be very helpful for me, but I did find that it had some undesirable side effects, and I felt concerned about those after a time. And my wife, in so many ways, encourages me to be healthier. So that's a blessing.
Yeah, I've actually taken. I'll leave that story for another time.
All right, so I want to segue because I have really wanted to get into your love story a little bit. We were talking about how we kind of missed that out in our previous podcasts and talking about manifesting a partner.
Yeah. Excuse me. So I think last time I mentioned that I wasn't really looking for it at the time, which is true. I was actually looking to sort of wrap up my affairs in America and move back to Israel and get to work on making peace in the Middle East or whatever, which I didn't end up doing. You can tell. But when I came back to the States after spending some time in Israel, I started spending a lot of time with my roommate Amy, and we were a little bit dating without realizing it, just sort of spending all our time together, going on long romantic walks and going to the fancy pizza place and getting, gourmet food together and whatever, enjoying life together, without the idea consciously that we were dating each other. We were just sort of doing all the things that people who are courting would do without being explicit about it. Nothing, we weren't kissing each other or anything like that. But eventually we took some LSD together. And during the trip, we sort of both kind of realized how harmonious we were together and how much we really just enjoyed being in each other's presence, like perpetually all the time, doing everything together. And about a week after that LSD trip, we sort of made our feelings explicit to each other verbally. There was like a sort of, there's a telepathy almost that can occur when you're tripping with somebody, where like we knew what was being said, but it's like, okay, we're tripping, so like maybe I shouldn't say I love you, because like that's, maybe it's just the drugs, whatever, but like I feel you saying I love you and me saying I love you, and like it's all right here, right now. And then for a week we were like, I don't know, was that real? Did that happen? And then at the end of the week we were both able to articulate to each other, no, absolutely, I felt that energy from you, you felt that energy from me, that was real, I do love you, let's be together. It was very beautiful, I think. But in terms of manifesting it before it happened, you asked me about that. And I don't think I mentioned this on the last podcast, but I did mention it to you on the phone, which is that when I was in Israel, before this happened, I did actually go to a place called Amukah, where there's a tomb of a sage named Yonatan ben Uziel, who is a Talmudic era sage. They say really amazing things about him. Like he studied so intensely that like there was like a beam of light just like coming up from him, and if a bird flew over his head while he was studying, it would catch on fire. Like so much intense, like that's but Yonatan ben Uziel never got married because he was just totally absorbed in his books all the time. That's all he did, is read and study and teach what he was learning. But so he never had time to court anybody or get married, and it was his big regret. And so on his deathbed, he said that the merit of all of the studying he did should be that anybody who comes to his grave and prays there should find their soulmate and get to be with them. And so we have this place in Israel, Amukah, where his grave is, and people do that, especially Israelis, because they're already there. It's a small country. Religious Israelis, if they want to get married and they're having a hard time finding somebody, they'll go to this place. It's like in the middle of the forest, and there's really not that many forests in Israel. It's a desert country. But in the north, in the mountains, you have a very small area that's really like actually wooded and like a mountain forest area. And that's where it is. It's like in the middle of nowhere. It's one of the only places in Israel where you could have a middle of nowhere because of how densely populated it is, outside of the desert itself. But they'll go there and they'll pray to find somebody. And I went there not because I was praying to find somebody. I just happened to be in the area, and I was doing I love going to graves of sages. That's my favorite thing to do when I'm in Israel. I go to the graves of like sages who I find really inspiring, and that's like a big thing for me to do. So that's why I was there. But within a year after being there, and they do say you'll find somebody this year. That's part of the thing.
Wow.
And within a year of that happening, I did get together with Amy. So whether I intended to or not, maybe I invoked the blessing of Yonatan ben Uziel in terms of how I manifested it ahead of time. That's one possibility for sure.
Yeah, beautiful.
I did go back there with her, and we we prayed for those people in our lives who we know wanted to be with somebody who hadn't found somebody, that they should find people. And actually, none of the people I was praying for that day have found someone yet. So maybe you have to go there yourself.
You gotta, yeah, you
pray
gotta
for
go.
somebody else that's not necessarily going to do it.
Yeah, you gotta go yourself for sure. Makes sense. And they'll find them when they're ready.
Yeah. But
yeah, part of the can't remember if I told you this last time. Part of the work that I'm doing is helping people to align themselves to manifest a person into their lives, the person, I should say. So it's been interesting to hear everybody's stories about their experiences of doing it.
So I guess the question would be, what's the lesson in the idea that there's a place you can go to that makes this happen or helps that happen, right? It's got to be a lesson in it. Well, it's not the place, right? It's this guy's grave. It doesn't matter that it's a mukkah. If Yonatan ben Uziel were buried in a different area, then that would be his grave, right? He didn't say whoever goes to a mukkah. He says whoever comes to me. And what's so special about him? Well, for one thing, like we said, he dedicated a lot of effort and attention to something that was holy. And we can say that if he's going to say that through the merit of what he did, other people should be able to find something he didn't get, then we could also probably say that the effort he put in was something that merited finding one soulmate. You follow me? As in, if he is even able to say, by merit of my studying, someone should find a soulmate, then that means that his studying merits a soulmate, even if it's not his own. You can share that with somebody else. No, maybe we're not like so saintly that we're like sharing our merit with other people. We've got so much overflowing merit, we're just handing it out. But the idea would still be that if you can invest your effort and attention in holiness, then that merits the soulmate. What you do to find the soulmate once you merit the soulmate, I don't know. That's a maybe different conversation. But simply the idea that holiness merits the soulmate, I think that's the lesson I want to take right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as from my personal, hello, Kitty.
This is Diane.
Hi, Diane. And she's out.
She's gone.
Yeah, so my personal philosophy on it and our experience with it is that the only practical way to do it, in my opinion, is to do it from the inside out. So it's working, as you said, on your merits or on your connection with holiness, cultivation of virtue, and also knowledge of self. You know, I think especially when you're young, it is fairly difficult to find a long-term partnership because you actually don't really know who you are and where you're going. Yeah. At least for me, that was the issue. Was I couldn't clearly express to a woman what I was going to be doing in a month, let alone a year. Yeah. So I was a very unreliable person to try and be in a relationship with.
Yeah, and I was actually in a few sort of longer relationships, at least maybe for somebody of these younger ages, a couple years, a year and a half, whatever. And you're growing fast still at that point in your life, and you can sort of see. I had a 2.5-year relationship where we were different people when we exited it than when we came into it. I'm sure that happens at any age, but
yeah, sure.
At the speed at which it was happening at that point, we were very different. We grew apart dramatically, And so the relationship we were sort of still trying to have towards the end, when it was already probably unsalvageable, was one that couldn't exist anymore because it was between two people who weren't who they had been anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the basis of the relationship wasn't there anymore. I'm not saying that Amy and I haven't changed over the time we've been together. It's been, you know, almost 8 years, around this time of year that we got together. But but we've grown together instead of just each one of us growing and turning into something else.
Right. Yeah, I think that growing together part is the key word.
Yeah.
Like that has to be done on some level. Otherwise, you know, clearly you'll be doing the opposite, which is growing apart.
Right. But you're definitely right that there has to be, like, you know, self-growth before you get to the part where you can grow together with somebody else. You do have to sort yourself out first. That doesn't mean you need to be, like, perfect, you know, like once I am free of neuroses, then I can be in love. Like, no, we're all still working on, we're still working it out. Right.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I think part of it is the idea of getting to the point where you at least have your shit together enough that you can share what's a little bit broken in yourself with somebody else, in a way where you're not simply asking them to now deal with you and deal with your problem. In other words, you can turn to somebody else and say, this part of me is not okay. Now I need you to sort of fill in the gap for me. Make me whole with your activity. That's using somebody else, right? And it's not conducive to a healthy relationship. But you can also say, this is what's not okay about me, and I'm going to work on it alongside you, and I want to hear from you what you see about that. And to do that mutually with somebody, I think, is really part of the essence of a healthy relationship. It's not simply who can you be awesome with together, but it's who can you be vulnerable with together, and also acknowledge the brokenness with, you know. And you have to get to the point where you can do that, right? Nobody's sort of born ready to do that with another person. It's hard work. It's valuable and it's worth it. But
yeah, I'll say I feel that I know very clearly that in my early experiments with being in relationships, I had this part of me that really was scared to show those weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And for that reason, I would essentially avoid being in any long-term situation with anybody, because eventually your shit's going to come out. And I was in such denial of even wanting to look at it that I would just make up some other excuse why it wasn't working for me. And it's taken me years to realize that, but I do think it's a very common challenge that people have, because your relationships really bring up your dark side, you know, your shadow comes into the light.
yeah. If you're completely in it with somebody, then it's going to be all of you, right? The good and the bad. Like you said, eventually your shit's going to come up. There's no way to keep it out of your life forever, unless you're perfect. But you're not, you know. So.
Yeah, and that's really a prescription for suffering as well, is to try and push it down indefinitely and pretend as though it's not there.
Yeah.
Then if you take psychedelics, all of a sudden it'll you'll find it comes up all at once.
Yeah, which is why, you know, some people are advised not to take psychedelics if they really haven't looked at themselves, if they really have certain or even if they're aware of what the issue is, if they have certain traumas that they're simply not ready to be completely immersed in and faced with. Because the psychedelics will hone right in on anything that's misaligned and make you look at it.
It is one of their superpowers.
That is one of many amazing superpowers.
And also interesting to note that our society decided to make them so harshly illegal during that time in our history.
Yeah.
Because I can see the microcosm and the macrocosm in that picture. You know, we were suppressing all of these ideas and movements that were essentially attempting, or I shouldn't say attempting, they were exposing our shadow side as a country.
Yeah.
So the reaction was harsh and draconian even.
Tim Leary makes a really interesting point about that generation, the generation that protested and had these movements that was clamped down on in this way. That wasn't really just the LSD that they were taking. He said they were the first generation that grew up with the ability to change the channel when they were watching television and they could change the channel. If you don't like what you're seeing, flip to something else. You can change what you're looking at. And that imprint from a very young age made them believe that if I don't like what I'm seeing on the national stage, I can change the channel. We can get together and have a movement to change the channel. And we can, but the fact that so many people were ready to do it had to do with that imprint. It's an interesting thought. So what does the imprint of the internet do then? You know, we grew up with the ability not just to change the channel, but to pull up all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's the ability to know almost anything.
Yeah.
At least in terms of like objective recorded facts.
Yeah, but you also have to wade through so much bullshit, right? So it gets to the point where even the objective recorded facts become suspicious in the context of everything that's probably not true. Like an abundance of information doesn't necessarily give us more certainty about things, which is an interesting turn of events.
I think it's a very interesting turn of events. It's like we're drowning in information.
Yeah. There's a difference between information and knowledge. I remember Kalinowski, Dr. Kalinowski at Warren Wilson used to say, "My job as a professor is not to give you information. I'm here to tell you how to think."
Nice.
But yeah, especially now, you can look anything up anytime. That doesn't mean you know it, you understand it, you can use it.
Yeah, well, it almost makes retaining information less valuable and less I don't want to say less encouraged necessarily, but it does seem like there's this general feeling like, well, I don't need to remember that because I can just Google it, you know?
Which leads us to maybe then actually forget it. And then to not take that data point into account when we're making a decision later. Like it's all good and well to say I can find the information again later when I think about it, but I do think there's something bad going on with all of us that we're committing less to memory. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Yeah.
Well, I think the illness of the digital age is something that was, I think, not predicted by many people, or at least has proceeded forward with this momentum that seems impossible to slow. It seems like it's ever increasing momentum. And it's like we're in the thick of it and we're experiencing the extreme side effects as it's unfolding. But as I said, seemingly unable to slow the momentum of it at the same time.
Yeah. I think it's not something we can stop or slow down. I think it's just something we need to learn how to deal with and balance out with our non-digital lives, which I think is super important. To plug a Jewish concept, we have Shabbos, the Sabbath, or once every 7 days we turn all that stuff off. And I mean, of course, these rules have been around much longer than the cell phone has, but it just so happens that cell phones and computers and all that stuff, televisions, they all fall under the category of things that we can't use on the Sabbath. And so we happen to disconnect from all that stuff. And it's great. It really, spending a day where you're just actually present in the physical world completely. You don't scroll at all. If you have to look something up, you pull a book off the shelf. You just are where you are. And even if people aren't going to be living like religious Jews and not turning on the light switch and not cooking their dinner or whatever, cooking their dinner ahead of time using timers, whatever. You don't have to do all that stuff, but I definitely would encourage everybody to spend, even if it's not once a week, once a month, just turn it all off. Just turn it off. You don't need it.
Yeah, amen to that. We're about to go on a little family trip, do some digital detox.
It's super important. Super important. Of course, once Shabbos is over, I turn on my phone and I look at Reddit and whatever, but you need to stop sometimes.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most potent and simple medicines for the disease that we're talking about.
Yeah, just balance it out with not having it.
And real nature connection. I think seriously the biggest problem we face as a human society is our general disconnection from nature.
I would definitely agree with that. Being a city dweller, I mean, I'm really lucky to have a park nearby where there's a lot of beautiful greenery and trees, and but it's not really a substitute. And I do use it. But I think the other thing, other than nature, to do, to immerse yourself in nature when you're not being digital, is to be with community. Whether that's family or people who share your interests or your friends, but being in community when you're explicitly not being digital is also, I think, vital.
Yeah, well, people are nature.
Right.
I think that I kind of along the same vein, I think at some point in our definition of language, we made a separation between humanity and nature as though they are in some way disconnected. And I think that the effects of that language and the subsequent mindset have actually been tremendously damaging.
Yeah. It sets up, whether it's an adversarial relationship or like a caretaker relationship, we need to defeat nature, or we need to harness nature or whatever, or we need to like protect nature. We are the shepherds of the whole planet. We are its stewards. Either one is not really a great mindset to have. I mean, I do think environmental stewardship is a good impulse. Like, don't get me wrong. I want to be green here, but yeah, that drawing a distinction and saying, we're somehow other from it. We have to be. It's not healthy.
It's deeply wrong. Deeply, dangerously wrong.
And it leads to a skewed understanding of the self as well. Because we're also subject to forces being part of nature, internally as well, like psychological forces. The objection, I think that part of wanting to put distance between humanity and nature is connected to this idea of human agency and free will. That things in nature are sort of just driven by instincts and the laws of nature, the laws of physics, whereas we can rise above all that and do something out of our own pure volition that's contrary to physics or something like that. They're not necessarily contrary to physics, but that is not predestined for us to do. Nature acts in that way. Nature acts in a sort of automatic way, which comes from like this mechanical understanding of nature, but we don't want to think that we're subject to forces outside ourselves, or at least forces outside humanity. Which is a little hubristic. I'm not saying free will doesn't exist, and I'm not saying I believe in free will either, but there's an obsession with the idea that we're just masters of our destiny that I think is a little misguided. Which isn't to say you can't subtly influence where you're going. I'm not saying people shouldn't try to do stuff.
No, certainly not. This is a great thread here, because this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. And it's interesting when you seek to put those pieces together of free will and destiny, of being the master of your reality, or being completely I guess along for a ride. It seems to me that there's some sort of interplay between the two and not simply one or the other.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of perspective almost. It's like, I've heard the comparison. I'm really into this school of Hasidic thought called Ishbitz. There was a rabbi who wrote a book called The Mea Shiloach, where he really expounded certain Hasidic perspective, and he had a movement that came from him. And one thing that he famously is, a lot of people say he didn't believe in free will, that's like the big controversy about him. And that's possibly true. But I heard this kind of metaphor to explain what is meant within that school of thought about this. And let's take Hamlet. This is the metaphor. Hamlet, does he have free will? The story's not really interesting if he doesn't, right? If we're watching the play, the whole interesting thing is, does he make the decision to kill his uncle and avenge his father? Does he not make that decision? All of the drama makes no sense and is totally uninteresting if we're not going to assume that these characters know what they're doing and why they're doing it and have some sort of volition to do what they're doing. But at the same time, Hamlet is a play that was written by William Shakespeare, and he actually doesn't exist, and William Shakespeare made him up. And so of course he doesn't have free will, because William Shakespeare decided everything he was going to do. So like within the context of the play, of course Hamlet has free will, and outside the play, of course he doesn't. And we're kind of like that too. We're also characters in the story, a story that we do actually have a share in writing. We're a little bit different from Hamlet, but we're also not the only authors of it. That's at least what I believe. If I'm going to talk about a Hasidic idea, yeah, where there's divinity in it that's also writing the story. It's the primary author of the story that we're all just in. So that's free will for you.
Cool. I like that description.
It says in the Talmud.
I think it's important for a lot of people's general psyche and the continuation of their work simply to believe that they do have free will. Is, I suppose,
yeah,
part of
absolutely.
what you're saying.
it could lead to despair if somebody thinks that their choices don't matter, or rather that they're not able to make choices at all. It could lead you to just like not get up off the couch, right? But I don't have a great answer to that objection. The only answer I have is that I've thought this for a long time and I still do stuff.
Fair enough.
But like I say, it's all about context. It's not like I go around all day thinking I'm not making choices. This is all predestined. God already decided what I was going to do ahead of time. Maybe I should, but I don't. You know, I come back to that thought often, but you know, when I'm in the supermarket and I'm like, should I get the 2% milk? I'm like, no, my doctor told me my cholesterol is high. I'm going to choose the 1%, and it feels like I made a choice, you know. So in the Talmud it says that everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. That like the only thing that's sort of not controlled from above is how you feel about it, which is kind of a really profound statement, because how you feel about it is really important, actually. And that will affect what you do, but only indirectly, which I think is also an idea in modern psychology, right? You have the subconscious drives, which are really leading you to do what you end up doing, and your conscious mind is just kind of justifying everything to yourself.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what you're feeling deep down is actually guiding you, whether you're aware of it or not. It's your feelings that lead to the action, and that's what the Talmud is saying too. The Ishbitzer famously says that even the fear of heaven is in the hands of heaven, and that's why people say he doesn't believe in free will. But you can debate that. Mm-hmm. Like I'm saying, I think it's contextual. It's about what level are we looking at, and then of course it begs the question, like, well, what is heaven, and is there a heavenly consciousness that we can participate in that gets us to the level where we are actually in control of the fear of heaven again, because now we're from that place, we're in that place. I mean, that's talking elevated states of consciousness that may be accessible. So the question kind of gets more complicated when you keep going into it. But the seed of, regardless, the seed of free will isn't where it appears to be. I think that much is consistently true in all of these different Jewish ideas and in modern psychology.
Mm-hmm. So then what is your belief around, say, our thoughts and our words and our actions? I lost my light. Our thoughts and our words and our actions having an influence on the fabric of reality around us?
Well, in Judaism, we certainly hold that the spoken word is incredibly powerful and does shape the world. If you go to the very beginning of the Torah, the first thing that happens is that God speaks and brings light into existence by saying, "Let there be light." There's a mystical concept that the world is actually built out of, in mystical Judaism, the Hebrew alphabet, But we can understand this sort of more universally to say that the world is built out of language. Terence McKenna actually said this completely independently of Jewish mysticism. I've read a lot of McKenna. The guy wasn't into Jewish mysticism, I'm sure. But he says somewhere that I don't believe the world is made out of atoms and void any more than I believe it's made out of angels and demons. The world is made out of language, which is a very beautiful way of stating it. And mystical Judaism feels the same way. And this is how we read what it says in the Bible, that God spoke the world into being. And when we speak, we're participating in that. And so we've got a lot of really important rules about speech in Judaism. There's something called lashon hara, which is evil speech, and that's speaking negatively about other people. I mean, obviously there are places where you can do it. Let's say, there's somebody who's being violent and abusive to people. You can speak about them so that others are warned, whatever. If you need to vent about somebody who is bad to you, you can do that. But to simply go around town and say, Mrs. Jones makes a terrible lasagna, like, what does it help the world that you're telling people Mrs. Jones made a bad lasagna? And that's a very innocuous example, but these kinds of things like literally bring the world down. When we say negative things, when we have negative speech, that isn't constructive, because sometimes talking about bad things is constructive if you're trying to get somewhere good with it. But if you're just bringing up the negative for the sake of saying the negative, it's actually very harmful, we believe, not just to ourselves, but literally to the whole cosmos, because the cosmos, as we say, is made out of language. Everything you're saying is projecting out there. Our thoughts and our feelings definitely also affect the whole cosmos. That's what we hold in Jewish mysticism, but so much more so our words and our actions, which come from our thoughts and our feelings. But what we actually put out into the world is going to be very consequential. And actions are subtle. Some actions are not subtle. Obviously, there's some actions, you feed somebody, you clothe somebody, these are positive. You harm somebody, whatever, that's a negative thing. But the action of every day cutting the piece of paper to make a filter and whatever I'm doing, the effect that that's having on the cosmos is very subtle. But my speech is very, very concrete. It has weighted meaning behind it that we can understand readily. We know if speech is positive and negative. It's not ambiguous. I mean, I can say tomorrow it's going to rain, and it's fairly neutral. But beyond simply stating fact, when we converse, it's really either going to be for the good or for the bad. Right? If I talk to my friend, we're not just going to share, facts that you would have on a spreadsheet. There's going to be substance. There's going to be meaning that is going to affect the interlocutors, and then, like I say, the whole cosmos, because you're putting it out there. That's a very literal reading of the Jewish mystical answer to your question.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. That's pretty much in line with what I believe as well.
It's part of why we a big part of Jewish ritual is spoken prayer. When we pray, there is absolutely value to silent meditation and sitting and centering yourself. But we really hold speaking aloud, and we've got a whole prayer book. This is what you say in the morning, this is what you say in the afternoon, this is what you say on the evening, and if it's the Sabbath, you say this stuff instead. But there's a practice that was recommended by Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav, a different Hasidic Rebbe, a very famous Hasidic Rebbe, Jewish famous, who said he taught a type of meditation called hisbodedus, which is like a talking meditation. He said, go into isolation, so you can make sure that you're totally by yourself. If you talk, no one's going to hear you, no one but you and God, right? Ideally in nature, Ideally, go into the woods. If you can't go into the woods, go into your private room, right? And just start talking. He wasn't saying do this instead of the standard Jewish prayer book. He was saying, in addition to that, just go and start talking. Talk to him. Talk to God like he's your friend sitting there right in front of you. And it doesn't matter what you're saying. Even telling him that you don't know what to say to him right now, you can ask him to like open your mouth further that you know now what to say to him, and just keep talking. And what's going to come out will surprise you. And it's gonna be a different level than just on your thought level. There's something that happens psychologically when we translate a thought into speech that concretizes it a little bit. It makes it real. Let's say you've been holding a feeling inside yourself that you didn't give voice to. The minute you say it, even if you just say it to the empty room, to the woods around you, it makes it so much more real. And now you have to live with the fact that you put that into the world, and you're going to now act on it. You're going to make the world better because you admitted to yourself, to the world, that this is a reality. So speaking is a very powerful meditation too. Speech is very powerful.
Yes. Words hold great power. Use them wisely.
Yeah. So those are my two advertisements. You should every so often turn off your phone and not go online, and every so often go somewhere private and just talk stream of consciousness. Even if you're an atheist, talk. It's going to be different from just thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. That's cool to hear. It's something that I do practice. However, I haven't exactly thought about it in that way per se. But I do talk to God, and I do also just like to practice speaking. Something I've just noticed doing all this podcasting and such, some speech patterns that I have that I would like to improve, and ways that I can communicate more clearly.
Do those
things like that.
Warm-ups.
Yeah. Yeah. Making separations between words.
Enunciating.
Enunciation. Yeah. Important stuff. Very important. So let's see. It's funny. We have probably about 10 minutes left, and I have this long list of subjects I wanted to get into that are clearly not going to get touched, because I think where we went has been fun.
Yeah, and you should take the reins next time. I went I went places.
Oh no, I was happy about what you were doing. That's how I like to do this. So
yeah. Free range podcast.
Free range, yeah, exactly. So right now I feel that some of these other subjects are a little heavy to kind of dive into right at the end. I guess kind of along the same lines of what we're talking about, what is your perspective on the law of attraction?
That's a big question. I think that that it probably has some validity when we look into how synchronicity works in psychology, when we talk about the realm of meaningful coincidence and the mind's ability to find meaningful coincidence, which isn't to say that I'm being dismissive of it. Meaningful coincidence is actually meaningful.
Yeah.
Which is what a synchronicity is. And that's, I think, something that the mind has the ability to do. I agree with Jung that this is happening. And I think that the law of attractions, the dimension on which it is a real thing is on that level. I don't know if I'm being clear. But that said, it's definitely something one can use in one's spiritual practice, in addition to where I think it's true. Are you talking about the law of attraction as applied to, say, like magical practices?
Yeah, basically intentional creation, manifestation.
I do think we have the ability to do that kind of thing, and exactly what the mechanism is, whether we want to say it's the law of attraction or some other mechanism, I think is largely a matter of perspective. I really like, I don't know if I'm going to say that I still really like it, but at one point I was very influenced by when I was into occult stuff, I was influenced by the chaos magicians, the school of chaos magic that was kind of big in the 80s. And one thing that they push is the idea that belief itself can be a magical tool. That the mind's power in believing something can make things manifest. Like, how sometimes people are dismissive of something and they say, oh, that's not a real cure, it's the placebo effect. As if that's not impressive as all hell. The placebo effect is amazing. The mind has the ability to heal the body. And people say, oh, that's just no, that's a huge deal. The placebo effect is nuts, and it's real, and we should be able to harness it. And one thing that studies have found is that the placebo effect works even when people are aware that what they're taking is a placebo. If you give somebody a placebo and you say, this is a placebo, but the placebo effect works, so it's going to make you feel better, it has a noticeable impact.
That's amazing, yeah, and very powerful.
Yeah. So, okay, maybe I'm not saying that we should, throw out the Tylenol, just take sugar pills that'll always get rid of your headache. No, like combine it. But belief
you don't want to take too much sugar either.
Right. But belief
or really any.
Right. But you know what I mean, an empty capsule. But
yeah.
But belief is an incredibly powerful thing. And if attributing the mechanism of magic to something like the law of attraction makes somebody more able to accept the reality of magic in their belief system, then it will in fact help them be a better magician.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether or not it is true.
But I suppose if that's true, then it is true.
Sure, but a different explanation of why we're able to manifest things could also be believed, right? I'm able to manifest things not necessarily because the law of attraction, one might believe, but because I'm created in God's image, and so therefore God's image is that of the creator, that which I think can come into being. It's not that I attracted it to myself. It literally didn't exist until I willed it, is another perspective. And there are others one could take.
Yeah, well, I don't see those two to be particularly in contradiction.
Yeah, that could also be. The joke.
I mean, that's...
No, go ahead.
I was going to say those two specific pieces that you just touched on, in my opinion, are the most important aspects of the law of attraction. It's like you are using belief to create magic in your life, or create certain circumstances, and you are created in God's image, and that force of creation is working through your being. And yeah, created in the image of the creator, therefore you are a creator.
Yeah, if that's your if that's what you mean, then yes, I think that works. I do think we can do that kind of stuff. Where we should use that kind of ability in our lives I think is also an important conversation to have, and how we should do it. There should be some restraint, even if we want to encourage people to exercise their full spiritual potential.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have enough time to get into that, though. The laws of magical restraint, the limits of thaumaturgy.
Yeah, I think there are sort of some very natural limitations that come along with it, you know.
Sure.
Like there's a number of other factors that need to be in alignment for your manifestation to come about, you know, for the manifestation of your vision.
Sure.
And if that vision is not in alignment with those sort of underlying principles or laws, it won't come about. But I do believe that there's, you know, you can also create things from a place that is not necessarily your highest self, your highest good, and sort of create more circumstances of suffering, or, you know, bring about more karmic realities.
Yeah, there's you run into a lot of danger when you get deep into that stuff. There karmic pitfalls get worse when you're in a place where you can make bigger ripples in the pond. I'm using a lot of different mixed metaphors.
Yeah, well, so I like to use a couple of these phrases when I think about this stuff, and one of them is in divine order with divine timing, and the other one is may our work be in service of the highest good. Yeah.
And that's very it's good to invoke being for the highest good in that way, absolutely. And that the activity should be for the purpose of the divine will being fulfilled, and not attempting to be contrary to it, which is impossible anyway. But that's definitely the right intention to have, for sure, in terms of timing and placement and all.
Yeah, well, we're pretty much out of time. We have a few more moments. Are there any parting words you'd like to send us off with?
We should do this again rather soon. I'm going to look at the schedule, because I know you have other things you wanted to talk about, and we really, you know, can get into all of that stuff. Perhaps next time we can go a little longer.
Yeah, there's a lot of movements happening in our country and in our world that I think are very interesting, and some are rather concerning. So I want to get into discussing and defining some terms and movements and things like that.
I'll be glad to discuss all of it. I really,
Perfect.
Really look forward to it.
Great.
Next time on
all right, the Super Connector Podcast. Thank you, Karel. It's always great to see you.
It's always wonderful to see you, Alec. I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you, and same to you. Peace and love, my friend.